Welcome to the Empowered Team Podcast. I am your host, Kari Schneider, and today, it's all about identity architecture. What do I mean by identity architecture? I mean like who you are, who you believe you are, why this is so important in leadership and business, because when I say business, you think business leaders, but you're a leader in your life. You're a leader in your actions. You're a leader around your community. So this is so important to understand what you believe about yourself, because it's going to dictate every single action you take. And I don't know if you're the person who wants to keep taking actions that are not serving your future self or where you want to go, or if you are the person that is feeling controlled by old stories, or if you're the person that wants to have your identity to be so aligned and so congruent with who you are becoming. That's what we're talking about today, your identity architecture. So let's dive in. Maybe you've said things like this: I've always been a night owl, or I'm just not a morning person. Or I remember one time I said, I'm not that creative. And someone turned to me and they said, "You are so creative." I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, "You create programs, you've created a gym, you've overhauled multiple homes." And I'm like, oh, because in my mind, I identified a creative person as a person who was an artist or a musician. That's the only narrow thinking I had around creativity. And then I realized, oh, you're right. I am so creative too. So maybe you have some thoughts that are like this, where you have identified yourself in one way or not in another way. And it's so important that you are clear on your own identity with yourself, so you're creating the actions that you want in the world, whether they're toward other people or toward the goals that you want or the life that you're creating. I'm terrible with money. I'm such a failure. I'm overweight. I'm not a good manager. Whatever your thoughts are, those I am statements are creating what you believe about yourself and thereby your identity. So we want to really understand that those thoughts are not facts. They're just stories you've either picked up along the way by an experience you had or by something that someone else told you. I'm going to say this again. Those stories that you're telling yourselves are not facts. I've done it. We've all done it. They're just a story. We've picked them up along the way in our experience of life. And it's all good. We can restructure this. We can change this. We are malleable. It's a good thing. They're just identity stories. Okay, remember that it's a pattern of behavior and it's only reinforced. The reason that feels so solid as an identity is because we've reinforced the pattern of behavior with more thoughts about it and more behaviors. And we just keep going through that system. It's like adding a layer after a layer after a layer of concrete until you've got a thick layer of something that feels solid. But when you realize it's just a layer after a layer after a layer of thoughts and behaviors, that's all it is. That's all that's going on. So here's the science behind it. A thought is basically a small sentence in your brain. In science, they would call it a small, repeatable mental pattern. An example of a small, repeatable mental pattern is, I'm not a morning person. That's all it is. That's a thought, a sentence in your brain, in your head. All right? Then the way we turn that into a belief is that we repeat it over and over again. It's something like, if I'm not a morning person, we repeat it in different ways. It's not, I'm not a morning person. I just can't get up in the morning. I must not be able to wake up early. Notice how those are all sentences in your brain, mental patterns repeated over and over. That's how we create a belief. We just got more of the same idea repeated in different ways. Even in the same way, we just keep repeating it and repeating it. That's all it is. So remember, we've got a thought, a sentence in your brain. Scientists call this a repeatable mental pattern. And then we've got a belief. It's something we've repeated over and over in the same way or in different ways to reinforce that thought. And then lastly, We create more emotion around how we're thinking, and that creates more behavior because our emotional state and our thinking state create actions. So we've created these actions, and then you end up following through, but you're believing this about yourself. You take that thought and you believe it about yourself, and guess what? It goes from, I don't like to wake up early to I am a night owl or I am not a morning person. So that thought over and over and then becoming about yourself with reinforced behaviors, it becomes an identity. What the heck? That's how it's created. Now, if you know how it's created and the science behind it, guess what we can do? We can deconstruct an identity. We can create an identity. We can do whatever we want with identity. So here's one more little scientific nugget about this. And it's called the self-signaling theory. And this is what that's all about. The self-signaling theory is basically when your brain doesn't just respond to the facts, it responds to your own thoughts. And then what your actions signal to you and how yourself, it signals to you, your actions signal to you who you are. So if you go and sleep in through your alarm, and then you go and think about that backwards, you go, oh, well, I slept through my alarm. Oh, and I did that 3 days in a row. I must not be a morning person. So that is the self-signaling theory. Now, the thing about our brains, this is so wild, is that we're naturally made to survive. Our brains are doing everything they can to keep us alive. So naturally, we focus on the negative so that we don't get killed by that or hurt by that in the future. So we've got this negative bias. And if we have this negative bias, that means that we are going to keep seeing the negative things more than we see the positive things. So notice how our identity can be fed by our negative bias with this self-signaling theory, because it's our brain is not just responding to the facts, it's responding to what we think, it's responding to our actions that we take, and if those actions that we take aren't exactly what we want, we are signaling that back. Self-signaling theory. Another example of that on the positive side would be you go and buy some healthy foods, and that action signals back, hey, I'm someone who eats well. Why? Because I bought healthy foods. Even before you start eating well, you're signaling by buying the foods that you're someone who's eating well, even if you haven't eaten well yet, eaten healthy foods yet. So notice the same thing is happening with that alarm example that I gave. You slept in. And then you press snooze and you slept in again. You did it a couple times in the week. Even though you may be designed to wake up in the morning, you're already self-signaling that, oh, I guess I'm not a morning person. So it's very interesting how identity can work. But when we understand it, we can construct who we really want to be in the world. This is awesome. All right. And then we've got identity-based habits. This stuff, oh my gosh, if you've ever read James Clear and Atomic Habits, he literally has taken world-class research and compiled it into one book in such an excellent fashion. It is such a high-level, world-class book for you to read on habits. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it. So when we get into the science around identity-based habits, this is where the power of building your identity through repetition, through your repeated behaviors. Say it over and over. Repeat it. Get that? Repeated behaviors. We are repeating behaviors all the time, but we're typically doing them unintentionally. So a habit in scientific terms is a behavior that you don't even think about. You don't know or think about which leg you put in your pants first or how you brush your teeth. But that is the technical term for a habit. Usually, most of us refer to a habit as being this action that we want to take, usually a health habit, or a bad habit, something we don't want to do, something we do want to do repeatedly, often ritualistically, in a routine fashion. And if we do that, we often call that a habit. But what we realize, if we really look at it, we have so many habits in our lives. When we realize that we have them and we can see them, then we can create them or we can make them less likely. And that's so much of what comes with identity, because our identity is supported or refuted by our habits, our actions, those repetitions. And that's why that self-signaling is so important, because what we're consistently doing is who we end up becoming, who we believe we are, who others see that we are, who they believe we are. That's how it comes into formation. Our identity of ourselves and other people's identifying of us, who they believe we are, what they've identified ourselves as. So when we go into identity architecture, I want you to know how to create your own identity. I don't want you to be feeling like you are at the whim of whatever's been created in the past, or whoever you think you are that someone told you in your childhood, or who you believe you are based on someone else's identity of you, or based on a failure, or based on one success. Like, let's really start to identify with ourselves something that's solid, something that's amazing, something that we want to identify with. That'd be amazing. So let's do it. So the first step, we got 3 steps to this. The first one is going to be noticing your identity stories. The second one is going to be to choose your new identity story. And the third one, and I think this is the most important, is really building your identity with actions, building your identity with aligned actions. Now, I remember years ago, my husband, who's not my husband anymore, I call him my wasband. So there's an identity. I'm identifying him as, instead of an ex, I'm identifying him as my wasband, because after being together for 18 years and having so many incredible life experiences, even though there's some very, very hard experiences in our relationship, I don't want to think of him in a way that society implicates as a negative identity, an ex. Oh, you're ex. I don't like that. So I call him my wasband. I think that's a kinder, to me, more generous identifying of the kind of relationship that I want to have with him and how I want to think about him. So there we go. Years ago, my wasband, Paul, was out for a run, and he was doing intervals and he was pushing it. We were training for a race, and he had done a hard, I think, 1 minute or 2 minute works. And then he was on a 30-second or a 1 minute break. And someone who he knew in the volleyball coaching world had approached him because he was on a park path. And that person approached him and said, "Oh, hey, how are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I didn't know you were a runner." And it caused Paul at the moment to pause and go, am I a runner? He didn't think of himself ever as a runner. He thought of himself as an athlete. He was a volleyball player. He was, all kinds of things he thought of himself as. But then he reflected on it when we talked about it later. And he's like, yeah, I run 2, 3, 4 times a week sometimes. And yet I wasn't thinking of myself as a runner. So isn't it interesting that someone else points out, "Oh, you're a runner. I didn't know you were a runner." They see this identity in you and we don't see it in ourselves. So that can happen so often, where someone else's identity of us is very different than our own identity of us. It's happened to me so many times. My size, the look. When I was in high school or university, people thought I was a cheerleader. I'm like, that is so not interesting to me, and never have I been a cheerleader. But thank you, I think, maybe not. But that's just, they saw me and they saw a look and they identified me with that. And I was like, no, sorry, that's not who I am. But you just go ahead and think of me that way however you want. So realize that people are going to have identities of you and you are going to have identities of you. And you get to decide what you want to believe and what you want to action into and reinforce. So notice your identity stories first. Remember, these aren't facts. Identity stories are the things we're constantly telling ourselves. And when we do this, we think it's benign. We think it's not that important that we're doing that, but it's actually creating our identity. It's creating who we are. Remember what I said. Thoughts, a sentence in your brain, then it goes into a belief by repeating it over and over and over, and then believing it about ourselves. And then we're having emotional states and actions that reinforce it and layer it on over and over again, building that structure, if you will, of an identity. So thoughts that are identity stories that are thoughts, things like, I'm not organized. I'm not a good manager. I'm just not sporty. I'm not good at that. I can't focus. Those are not facts. They're self-concepts, and it's a narrative. It's a story. It's something we're telling ourselves about ourselves. So recognize your stories. It's a very, very interesting thing when we start to realize how much crap we're feeding ourselves about ourselves. Go figure. All right, so pause. Take a pause and ask yourself, where do I repeat thoughts about myself that sound like truths, that sound like they're real when they're actually not? Where do I do that? So that's step one. Identify your identity stories. What is the narrative that you are telling yourself? Step two. This is a fun part. Choose. Choose. Who the heck do you want to be? Who do you want to become, and what do you want to reinforce? Do you want to reinforce something that you're not pleased with in your life, or do you want to reinforce something that lights you up, makes you feel amazing, and makes you love who you are and the life that you're living? What do you want to reinforce? So step two is all about choosing this new identity. What does this look like? And it cannot be vague. It can't be vague like, I want to be healthier. I hear that, or I want to make more money, or I want to be a better manager, or I want to have a better marriage. No, we go through this in goal setting. It has to be very specific. It cannot be vague. It has to be clear. Be specific and be actionable. When you're specific and actionable, that's when you can actually action into your identity, because it's going to be your actions that show you and reinforce to you who you really are. So it cannot be vague. It sounds something like, I am someone, these are your identities. This is how you're thinking. I'm someone who gets up early and plans my day. I'm someone who loves to get up early and plan my day. I am someone who thrives under pressure. I am someone who delivers thoughtful outcomes, thoughtful contribution when needed. I am someone who's consistently learning and growing. Consider those, repeat those, and look for the evidence of it that shows, yeah, I am. I have never stopped learning from the time I can remember. I can't remember a time where I wasn't learning. I've learned since before kindergarten. I've learned ever since I can remember. And if I remember that, I can learn how to solve this problem. Interesting. I am a learner. I am capable. I am a problem solver. Look at how much comes from that when we really focus on what we're creating and who we want to be versus who we're allowing ourselves to become with shitty thoughts and actions that don't support what we want. All right. So choose your identity. And whatever it is, I am organized. I'm an early riser. If it's bullshit, you're going to have to choose a better thought around it. So for instance, if you're not an early riser and you want to go, I am an early riser, then you're lying to yourself. We don't want that. What we want is something that you do believe. So if you believe, I'm figuring out how to get up early. I am really good at figuring things out, and I'm getting up early based on these processes. And you be honest with yourself. So that is how we start to create the new identity. It's finding the zone of what you do believe that supports the new identity that you don't have yet. That's what it is. If you have struggled with managing and struggled with leading some of the people you work with, then you start with something like, and you really, really want to be a really connected leader, a really connected manager. You start with something like, I'm figuring out how to connect best with my employees to help their leadership. That, if you can believe that, is far more believable than I'm a great manager or I'm a great connector of the employees, whatever it is. So find out what you can believe that's really helpful for you becoming that identity. Step 3, and solid. This is where it's at. I love this. You build it with aligned actions, and you do what I've already alluded to, which is reminding yourself of what you've already done that supports that identity. I remember one time I had a client. This client was coming into the gym when I was running my training facility. And it's a high-performance facility. There's high expectations. Nobody walked in and carried a phone around. Anybody who walked in with something like a water bottle or coffee, that got left out of the training space. It was really structured. And business people who came into that environment loved it because they loved the reinforcement of high performance. And one day, and all of my private clients, not just the athletes, but the private clients, were high performers in life. That's why they loved being in a place like mine, because I was working with either aspiring high-level athletes or Olympic-level athletes. They loved that environment. They wanted high performance, and that's what I delivered. So I had a client one time walking in. He was top tier of what he did. He was in the field of law, top tier. And he came in complaining. And he almost started to sound whiny. And I laughed because I know who this man is. I know what he was up to in the world. And he was high level. And he's complaining away. And I listened and I listened. And he kind of paused and was looking to me for either some validation or reinforcement. And I chose in that moment to use a little humor, because humor can go a long way in tough situations. And I was like, it sounds like you've got this really tough case of poor me-itis. And he cocked his head and looked at me for a second. I was like, poor me-itis. And I said it slower, poor me-itis. And he got it. He realized he was having a pity party. And because I was reinforcing, that's not who you really are. Come on now. Remember who the hell you are. Remember who the fuck you are. Come on now. And he paused. He had laughed. He paused. He's like, yeah. And we got back at it and going forward in who he believed he really was and going forward into what he was really up to in the world. And that is sometimes what we need to do. But remember that our perception of ourselves versus someone else's perception of ourselves, we can use that to our advantage when someone really knows how amazing we are. Have them remind you. Have them remind you. That helps support you, and they know who you are based on what you've done and the actions and how you've shown up in the world. And that's what step 3 is about. It's building identity-aligned actions. It's if you want to do and have a new identity in the world, you're going to have to do some things that support that. Take these little tiny actions, like the example of buying healthy food. You may not eat healthy food yet, but you buy healthy food. That's one of the first steps, because someone who eats healthy, what do? They buy healthy food. Someone who's an amazing leader, what do? They get support. Someone who's incredible with their family, what do? They support their family and show up for their family. So these are the things. We're looking for the actions that are aligned for the identity that you want to have. And if you have to, because this is the thing, identity isn't wishful thinking. We can think about who we are till the cows come home. The identity is built and reinforced with the actions, the patterns and repetitious actions that come from the belief of who we are. That's how the identity is really built. That's how it lasts. is because we're the people that do these things. That means I am blank. So do the things. You might have to replace an old habit. That's why I'm recommending people like Angela Duckworth, Brene Brown, James Clear. These authors and researchers are profound in being able to elucidate the literature in a way that's clear, concise, and easily actionable. They know their stuff, so use those resources. What it sounds like is taking the smallest action and changing it to support the new identity or the new behavior that you really want. That looks like things like, oh, I'm not that early riser. I'm going to take that alarm clock and put it across the room. So when the alarm goes off, I actually have to get up to snooze it. It's little things like that. Because, why? I'm becoming an early riser. That is the actions that reinforce the behavior. Do those types of things. Old identity, old habits, old outcomes, period. New identity, new habits, new outcomes. That's how it works. I'm bad with routine, erratic evenings, late starts, versus I know how to plan. I'm planning right now. I'm creating new routines for early starts. When we introduce new identity actions, what we want to do is have those cues around us. And I gave an example of the alarm clock as a cue, but I also gave an example of myself as a cue in the story about the client and poor Me-itis. I was the cue to remind him of who he really was at that time. And those cues, they can be people, they can be small actions, they can be an alarm clock across the room. The cues can be so many different things. So the cues create the new habits, create the new outcomes. The alarm clock signals early rising. The small wins signal competence if you're celebrating small wins. The identity is growing by doing. Celebrating consistency signals reliability. Whatever you want to create more of in your life, you're going to have to take some actions that then equal, oh, someone who's reliable. What do? They celebrate consistency. Someone who's competent, what do? They track their wins. Someone who's an early riser, what do? They put their alarm clock across the room so they always get up. So you've got the small actions that continue to cue yourself of who you are. So this is where I want to leave you with this, is that don't forget that a lot of the time when we're trying to make a new identity or reinforce an identity of ourselves that we may not have been tapping into enough, we're relying only on us. And we can do so much more with the support of other people. Your identity isn't just you in the world alone in a bubble. Your identity has to do how your experience and your actions and your being interacts with others. So if I gave you a sequence, it would look like this. It's your thoughts, sentences in your brain, your thoughts about yourself. That creates an emotional state, and that emotional state plus the thoughts create your actions, what you're going to do in the world. And then lastly, be around people who reinforce not only those actions, but the belief in who you really are. Be around those people. That is how you're going to continue to create the identity of who you really want. And that it's reinforced over and over in research. We know this. All I'm giving you today is what I've experienced personally myself with thousands of human beings and what the research says over and over for decades in different ways, new research, all of the things. So, thoughts about yourself over and over, belief system about yourself creates an emotional experience. The thoughts plus the emotion creates your actions. Those actions in the world interact with other humans. Be around the humans who see the identity that really is you. the identity that matters most to you. Now, when I say this holds true for relationships, friendships, family, business, who you're meeting new in the world. Keep this going. It's not just one environment. Your identity matters in all sorts of areas. Okay. Last thing I'm going to say, because you're so empowered, and I've already sworn once in this episode, so I'm going to say it again. Remember who the fuck you are. You're amazing. Sometimes you don't give yourself credit for how much amazing you've created, you've done, you've persevered through in the world. You are amazing. Keep going. Remember who you really are and create more of that. Keep reinforcing it because you got so much good to give to the world. If this has been informational or impactful or great for you, share it. Share it with someone else who you know needs to hear this right now. Happy January. Keep going. Keep up that motivation. Keep up that identity.